Hello, hello. Today we are going to be reading The Gnome, a fairy tale by the brothers Grimm. There once I swear I can read. There was, once upon a time, a rich king who had 3 daughters who went on daily walks in the palace gardens. Now the king loved all types of fine trees, but there was one for which he had such affection that if anyone gathered an apple from it, he wished them 100 fathoms underground. And when harvest time came, the apples on the tree were all red as blood. It's very appetizing. The 3 daughters went every day beneath this tree and looked to see if the wind had blown down an apple, but they never found one. The tree was so loaded with fruit that it was almost breaking, and the branches hung down to the ground. The king's youngest child had a great desire for an apple. Kind of makes you wonder why the king didn't share. Anyway, so the youngest said to her sisters, "Our father loves us far too much to wish us underground, and it is my belief that he would only do that to people who were strangers." And when she finished speaking, the child plucked off quite a large apple and turned to her sisters, saying, "Just a taste, my dear sisters, for never in my life have I tasted anything so delightful." Then the 2 sisters also ate some of the apple, whereupon all 3 sank deep down into the earth, where they could hear no bird call. Whoops. When midday came, the king wished to call them to come to dinner, but they were nowhere to be found. He sought them everywhere in the palace and the garden, but could not find them. Then he was much troubled and made known to the whole land that whosoever brought his daughters back again should have one of them to wife. Hereupon so many young men went about the country in search that there was no counting them. That's a lot of dudes. For everyone loved the 3 princesses because they were all so kind and so fair of face. They probably had other qualities, It's never really stated in fairy tales, but that's okay. Anyway. 3 young huntsmen also went out, and when they had traveled for about 8 days, they arrived at a great castle, in which there were beautiful apartments, and in one room a table was laid on which there were delicate dishes, which were still so warm that they were smoking. But in the whole of the castle no human being was either to be seen or heard. The young huntsman waited there for half a day, and the food remained warm and smoking. And at length they were so hungry, they sat down and ate. And they agreed with each other that they should stay and live in this castle, and that one of them, who should be chosen by casting lots, should remain, and the other 2 should seek the king's daughters. Sounds like they're like, hey, this marrying the king's daughter, yeah, that's cool, but like magic house, yeah, I'd take that. Anyway, so they cast lots, and the lot fell on the oldest. So the next day, the 2 younger huntsmen went out to seek, and the eldest stayed at their new home. At midday came a small gnome and begged for a piece of bread. The eldest huntsman took the bread which he had found there and cut a round off the loaf, and was about to give it to the gnome. But whilst he was giving it to him, the latter let it fall and asked the huntsman to be so good as to give him that piece again. The huntsman was about to do so, and stooped, on which the gnome took a stick, seized him by the hair, and gave him a good beating. What? Okay. The next day, the second eldest huntsman stayed at home, and he fared no better. When the 2 others returned in the evening, the eldest said, "Well, how have you gotten on?" "Oh, very badly," he said, and then they lamented their misfortune together. But they said nothing about it to the youngest, for they did not like him, and always called him Stupid Hans, because he did not exactly belong to the forest. Okay. I'm sorry. So the 2 eldest have been beaten up by a gnome. Okay. Anyway, on the 3rd day, the youngest stayed at home. I'm guessing that means that he stayed at the castle that they just kind of found and decided to take. So the youngest stayed at home, and again the little gnome came and begged for a piece of bread. When the youth gave it to him, the gnome let it fall as before, and asked him to be so good as to give him that piece again. And then Hans said to the little gnome,
"What, canst thou not pick up that piece thyself? If thou wilt not take as much trouble as that for thy daily bread, thou dost not deserve to have it."
Then the gnome grew very angry and said he was to do it. But the huntsman would not, and he took the little gnome and gave him a thorough beating. What? Okay. This story is wild. Then the gnome screamed terribly and cried,
Stop and let me go. I will tell thee where the king's daughters are."
And when Hans heard that, he left off beating him, and the gnome told him that he was an earth gnome, and that there were more than 1,000 like him, and that if he would go with him, he would show him
where the king's daughters were.
I feel like the moral of the story so far is gnomes are absolute brats. They're very violent, and also if you beat them up, good things happen. Then the gnome showed him a deep well, but there was no water in it. And the gnome said
that he knew well that the companions Hans had with him did not intend to deal honorably with him. Therefore, if he wished to deliver the king's children, he must do it alone. The two other brothers would also be very glad to recover the king's daughters, but they did not want to have any trouble or danger.
Wait, so they were brothers? Not just three huntsmen in a group. They were brothers. A surprise. Surprise, they're brothers.
Hans was therefore to take a large basket, and he must seat himself in it with his hanger and a bell, and be let down. Below were 3 rooms, and in each of them was a princess with a many-headed dragon, whose heads she was to comb and to trim.
What?
But he must cut them off.
And having said all of this, the gnome vanished. This has taken a turn, hasn't it? In the bottom of a well, dragons. Okay. When it was evening, the 2 brothers came and asked how he had got on, and he said, pretty well so far, and that he had seen no one except at midday, when a little gnome had come and begged for a piece of bread, and that he had given him some. But the gnome had let it fall, and had asked him to pick it up again. But as he
Did not choose to do that, the gnome had begun to lose his temper, and that he had done what he ought not, and had given the gnome such a beating, on which that small creature had told him where the king's daughters were.
The two older brothers were so angry at this that they grew green and yellow. Like literally. Okay. The next morning, they went to the well together and drew lots to see who should first seat himself in the basket, and again the lot fell to the eldest, and he was to seat himself in it and take a bell with him. And then he said,
If I ring, you must draw me up again immediately.
When he had gone down for a short distance, he rang, and they at once drew him up again. I guess being lowered in a basket, that'd be kind of freaky. I could see somebody panicking a little bit about that. And then the second seated himself in the basket, but he did just the same as the first. Wow, this second brother, he gets no screen time. Okay. And then it was the turn of the youngest, but he let himself be lowered quite to the bottom. He let himself be lowered quite to the bottom. When he had got out of the basket, he took his hanger. Hanger? What the heck is a hanger? Hold on. Oh, okay. It's a short sword with a curved single-edge blade. Today I have learned. When he got out of the basket, he took his hanger and went and stood outside the first door and listened. And he heard the dragon snoring quite loudly. He opened the door slowly, and one of the princesses was sitting there and had a 9-headed dragon's heads laying upon her lap, and was combing them. Then he took his hanger and hewed at them, and the 9 heads fell off. That must have been a very small dragon. Or don't think about it too much. It's fine. It's just, how does that work? 9 faces. Were they like really small? Were they not all on the lap? Okay. So the princess sprang up, threw her arms around his neck, embraced and kissed him repeatedly, and took her stomacher, which was made of pure gold, and hung it around his neck. Stomacher. What is a stomacher? Okay, hold on. A decorated triangular panel that fits in the front opening of a woman's gown or bodice. Oh, okay. So it covers the front bit of the corset. Neat. I learned 2 things today.
And then he went to the second princess, who had a dragon with 5 heads to comb, and delivered her also. And to the youngest, who had a dragon with 4 heads, he went likewise.
And they all rejoiced and embraced him and kissed him without stopping. Wow. Okay. Then he rang the bell very loud, so that his brothers above heard him, and he placed the princesses one after the other in the basket and had them all drawn up.
But when it came to his own turn, he remembered the words of the gnome, who had told him that his comrades did not mean well by him.
Was that a pun? Because they're in a well. Also, now you're listening to the advice of the gnome. Didn't he say, go do this by yourself? There's also a lot of loud vehicles while I'm recording this. Please. Okay. So he took a great stone, which was lying there, and placed it in the basket. And when it was about halfway up, his false brothers had cut the rope, so that the basket and the stone fell to the ground. And they thought he was dead, and ran away with the 3 princesses, making them promise to tell their father that it was they who had delivered them. And then they went to the king, and each demanded a princess in marriage. Why would the princesses agree to this? There's just certain things in some fairy tales where I'm just like, I don't get it. Is this like a cultural thing? I don't know, man. Anyway, so in the meantime, the youngest huntsman was wandering about the 3 chambers in great trouble, fully expecting to have to end his days there, when he saw, just hanging on the wall, I guess at random, there was a flute. And then he said,
"Why dost thou hang there? No one here can be merry." And he looked at the dragons' heads likewise, and said, "You too cannot help me now."
And he walked backwards and forwards for such a long time that he made the surface of the ground quite smooth. That's a lot of walking. You know, just getting his steps in, though. That's important. But at last other thoughts came to his mind, and he took the flute from the wall and played a few notes on it.
And suddenly a number of gnomes appeared. With every note that he sounded, one more came. He played until the room was entirely filled.
A room filled with gnomes. That sounds like a nightmare.
The gnomes all asked what he desired, so he said he wished to get above ground, back to daylight, on which they seized him by every hair that grew on his head, and thus they flew with him onto the earth again.
By his hair. Ow! What if he had a beard? Are they just... Ow! Okay. When he was above ground, he at once went to the king's palace, just as the wedding of one of the princesses was about to be celebrated. And he went to the room where the king and his 3 daughters were. When the princesses saw him, they fainted. I wonder if the princesses were like, you know those goats that they get startled and they just like faint? I wonder if the princesses were like goats. Anyway, hereupon the king was angry and ordered him to be put in prison at once, because he thought the younger brother must have done some injury to the princesses.
When the princesses came to themselves, however, they entreated the king to set him free again. The king asked why, and they said they were not allowed to tell that.
But their father said that they were to tell it to the stove. And he went out, listened at the door, and heard everything. Then he caused the 2 brothers to be hanged on the gallows, and to the 3rd he gave his youngest daughter, and on that occasion I wore a pair of glass shoes, and I struck them against a stone, and they said, clink, and were broken. That is the full tale of the gnome. What? I feel like this whole thing was just kind of a joke, wasn't it? Man, what a wild ride, though.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, etc. All of the YouTube things.
I'll see you next time.